I first became interested in what was then called electronic publishing about 10 years ago, when I was chairman of the library committee at CERN, and began to see the impact of electronic media on publishing. And so I organised a workshop at CERN with the major publishers to try and understand where this is going. I then became chairman of the library committee at the Rutherford Lab, where I was faced with exactly the same problems, and at that point initiated a project to create what is now called the Institutional Repository. So I've had about 10 years interest in this area, but of course there's a big difference between being interested in it and doing something about it. So when I was approached by the PhysMath Central to ask whether I can consider being editor-in-chief of a new journal, this seemed to me to be an exciting opportunity to implement the new open access model. Now, why is the open access model, in my view, something which we should all support? And it seems to me that it's worthwhile to go back, say, to the end of the 19th century and look at the great philanthropic library movement of Andrew Carnegie. What motivates that is that there should be no artificial barriers to knowledge and self-improvement. And in the late 19th century, the way you did that was to provide free access to literature, free access to knowledge through the free public libraries. Now, 100 and something years later, the web, the internet, allow us to take that one stage further, because you have the library, you have to be able to walk to it, so it's a rather local thing. The internet and the World Wide Web is a very much global phenomenon. And so the open access model, where the author pays the cost of publishing, as seen as part of the cost of doing research, it leads to the publication journal model. But then anyone who has an interest has unlimited access to that. Seems to me to be something which can only be of benefit to society as a whole. And as I say, there should be no barriers, artificial barriers, to self-improvement and self-knowledge. The advantage for me of PhysMath Central is that it comes from a stable which does not have a print history, and therefore there's no memory of how we used to do it in the old days. And therefore what it does do is to implement the open access model in what I might call a pure way. It's not trying to reproduce what exists with the traditional journals. And I think because of that there are opportunities for creating new types of journal and new types of information, of being able to use the cross-linking power of the internet to be able to deliver to the researcher something which is considerably more than just electronic access to the information, but it will allow him. One of the other things which I did while I was at the Rutherford Lab was, for a couple of years, I was also director of their e-science centre, and am therefore was very much involved in developing the e-science paradigm, the concept of portals, the idea of combining data from different sources in order to produce new knowledge, which was only implicit in separate data sources taken separately. But when you put them together, then you create something new. And the first requirement for this is that you have easy and unlimited access to the source material. So why not just rely on the institutional repositories and the standard archives? And the reason is that it's vitally important for the integrity of scientific research that we maintain the peer review system or something equivalent to it. There has to be an independent guarantor of the quality of the data. And so a robust and rigorous peer review system, along with open access, the open access model, seems to me to be, at least for the foreseeable future, the correct way forward. And therefore I'm very pleased to have been asked to be editor-in-chief of PMC Physics A, and I I'm looking forward to creating that as one of the leading journals in particle physics, astronomy, instrumentation, nuclear physics, etc. It's a very exciting opportunity and a great chance. The scope of PMCA is, on the one hand, actually quite well focused, but on the other hand, it's really quite broad within that narrow focus, if I can kind of put it that way. So we cover from, on the one hand, particle physics, and on the other hand, astronomy and cosmology. And in between, I think it's important to take in nuclear physics and also instrumentation, both accelerators and detectors. And this then gives a coherent body of information. And it's a magazine, it's a journal, which I think people working in all of those areas ought to find interesting. Just for the casual reading of, oh, here's an interesting article, I might just read that at home. The key to creating the right environment for the journal is to have a high quality editorial board. So we currently have about 30 members of the editorial board who are all in their own field, I think recognized international experts. And they provide us with both advice and also primary reviewing of articles. We also, with their help, and use many other people to give us secondary opinions on the quality of articles that have been submitted. One of the advantages of a purely electronic open access journal rather than a print version which has been made available online is that we can be very flexible about the type and mix of articles that we publish. So there are no page limits, for example. We can have an article which is 2 or 3 pages long, but if you have 100 pages and that's what you need in order to make the case, then that poses no problem. It's not that we're limited by having to have, you know, 5th issue of this year cannot be more than 350 pages, so I'm afraid we'll have to publish your article next year when we have more space. Another advantage of the way in which PMC Physics A approaches things is that as soon as the article is accepted for publication, it's available online as a quotable source. And it's in its final form within a couple of days, but it's available as an electronic reference immediately. We also have the possibility both to accept input from and to deposit articles in archive, so that for the physicists and cosmologists and others who use archive essentially as their pre-printing service, then there's a very easy and transparent interface between the archive and PMC Physics A. The other thing which is actually very important, not so much for authors, but certainly for reviewers and the editorial board, is that the access to articles for review couldn't be simpler. It's a single click. And that, I think, is extremely important for minimizing the amount of time which reviewers and the editorial board have to spend in setting up the mechanics of doing a review, so that they can concentrate, they can print the article almost straight away, single click, and get on with the business of reviewing without having to tech it or LaTeX it or convert it from this format to that. And that is another advantage of coming from a background which has never had print, because in order for the office to be able to do its job, it has to look like that. And the editorial process and the reviewing process